There came a time in Jesus' ministry where he wanted his disciples to get a taste of what it would be like for them to work on their own after he had returned to heaven. He gathered his faithful disciples together and blessed them, and gave them authority to cast out demons and heal the sick. He then warned them that in some of the places that they would go, people would not receive them very well. They would face persecution. Then he said these words, "Do not be afraid of those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather, be afraid of the one who can destroy both soul and body in hell." This passage is often cited to prove that Jesus believed in the Greek dualistic nature of mankind. They say that it is obvious from this passage that Jesus believed that people are made up of a body and a soul. Is it true? Did Jesus believe that people have immortal souls that survive the death of the body and go directly to heaven or hell? Please join me as we take a closer look at this passage today. If you are new to our podcast, we should do a quick review of some of the things that we have been sharing. We have asked the question, are people made up of two parts, a body and a soul? Or is it just an illusion of our minds that we have souls or spirits that live inside our bodies of flesh? It is actually one of the big questions that philosophers and theologians like to talk about. Not just now, but from millennia past, as evidenced through the literature and physical remains that we have from many cultures in the past, including the people of the Bible. It is kind of a difficult question to deal with because it is easy to get lost in translation and semantics. The word soul has so many shades of meaning. Even in modern English, the word soul can have a variety of different meanings. Do a survey and ask people what comes to their mind when you hear the word soul, and you will get a variety of answers. Many will talk about an immortal spiritual entity that is just temporarily housed here in our bodies of flesh, and that when this body dies, the soul will be released from the body, carrying with it our person, our consciousness, our mind. Some people believe that this soul may have actually made many journeys to earth and lived many lives through reincarnation. Such an intriguing idea. Others will say that for them, the word soul triggers up the idea of consciousness or self-awareness. When we look out on the world through our senses, we understand that there is something unique about us. We have an identity. We are a self-contained entity that has life experiences that are separate from everyone else. That, they say, is my soul. That is who I am on the inside. For others, they like to think of the soul as the mind, the intellect. I think, therefore I am. I can reason, I can debate, I can calculate, I can make predictions, I can remember my past, I can make plans for the future. My brain, my mind, they say, is the seat of my soul. Others may talk about their emotions. The heart knows what the heart wants, we say. And so, many believe that it is our deep-seated feelings that make up our soul. Our feelings of love, hate, joy, anger, duty, sadness, and ecstasy all spring forth from the soul. That part of us that appreciates art, music, and natural beauty is all from our soul. The brain may help this body of flesh get through life, but ultimately, people say, it is still just cells and neurons. If we really want to get in touch with our inner person, we need to get in touch with our feelings, our soul. Still others are quite pragmatic and say that the soul is simply another word for life. We think of the universal call for help, SOS. What does it stand for? That's right, save our souls. When the message is sent out, do we think that people are calling out for someone to come and save their spirits? Are they saying, please, come save our feelings, come save our brains? No, they are simply saying, please, come save our lives, right? What do you think of when you hear the word soul? I'd be curious. Let me know in the comments below. Let's do our own little survey right here at Worldviews. Well, if we today have so many different understandings about the meaning of soul, we might be able to begin to understand how there may be a little confusion as we try and understand what the ancients believed, especially as we bring their concepts through the veil of translation. When you read the King James Version of the Bible, the word soul comes up a lot. If you are a person who believes that people have immortal souls that can survive the death of the body and move on to another realm of existence, how are you likely to understand this mention of the soul when you read all of these passages in the King James Version? You will most likely interpret these texts as referring to the soul the way that you understand it to be. Would it surprise you to learn that the Hebrew people of the Old Testament did not believe that people had immortal souls? In fact, most of the people of the New Testament, including Jesus and his followers, also did not believe that people had immortal souls. Some people don't like some of the more modern translations of the Bible because all of those favorite texts that talk about the soul now suddenly have different words that are being used. In the new translations, many of these texts are being translated with words like life, mind, living being, or inner self instead of soul. I can understand why many Christians become uncomfortable with these new translations. Almost all Christians today believe that people have immortal souls that go immediately to their eternal reward at death. When anyone tries to hint that this is not what the Bible teaches, they become very reactionary. They call it heresy and false doctrine. They may even lose their Christian experience as they make their angry posts against some of these ideas. It's okay. I understand. They are defending what they believe to be truth. They are standing up for God. They are a soldier for Christ, defending what they believe to be the truths of the Bible. Unfortunately, in their comments, they show themselves to not have really studied the topic from the Bible. The Bible says that God alone is immortal. The idea of immortality of a soul, and even the concept of hell, actually comes from Greek philosophy, especially the writings of Plato. Scholars who study the time period of the early Christian church tell us that this Greek philosophy of Plato was present in the pop culture of the day. It showed up in the plays that were being done in the amphitheaters throughout the Roman Empire. And many of these plays certainly would have featured these concepts. But it was not part of the doctrine of the followers of Jesus, either while he was here or in the decades that followed. Now, you don't need to take my word from this. I encourage you to do a survey of recent Bible scholarship on this subject. I'll leave a list of some books in the description below, and you'll see that scholars who are immersed in the original languages of the Bible, who are immersed in the time period of Jesus and the history and the theology of the time period, not just of Jesus, but of the local temple teachings of the scribes and Pharisees, you will see that people of that day did not believe in the immortal soul. And I know we all live busy lives today. We may not have the time to buy some books and read through them and dig deep into this question, but I invite you to just do a simple Google search. Did the people of the Bible believe in the immortality of the soul? And see what kind of answers you get. So, what happened? If the early Christians did not believe in the immortality of the soul, how is it that it has become such a fundamental belief of most Christians today? Well, the biggest reason seems to have something to do with the delayed return of Christ. Early Christians believed that Jesus would return any day to take them home to a heavenly kingdom. As time went on and people started dying, it started to cause a crisis of faith in some. You can see this starting to happen in the church of Corinth as some of their loved ones began to die. They became very concerned. They wrote to the Apostle Paul asking questions about death and life after death. You can read all about it in 1 Corinthians chapter 15. What is going to happen to my beloved wife? She died before Jesus came back. Did she miss out? Will I see her again? Paul tries to reassure them and reminds them of the Jewish teaching of the resurrection of the body at the end of time. But the concept of a resurrection of the body at the end of time was kind of a little foreign to their thinking, and they had a difficult time grasping how it could be possible. They were, after all, Greeks, living in Greece, living under a cloud of Greek culture and philosophy that taught about the immortality of the soul, and that at death people go directly to heaven or hell for their eternal reward. As the years go by, a real tension develops between the belief system of Paul and the belief system of Greek philosophy. The idea that the body of a loved one would disintegrate to dust and then somehow be all put together again at the second coming of Jesus seemed a little foreign to their thinking. How could the mind, consciousness, and memory of their loved ones somehow be reintegrated into the resurrected body? It just didn't seem possible. You can see this reflected in 1 Corinthians 15. With what body do they come? They ask. As more and more people die, including Paul and all of the apostles, the tension between these ideas of the afterlife grow. Eventually, it just becomes more efficient and logical to believe in the elegant worldview of the immortality of the soul promoted by Greek philosophy. This belief system eventually became endorsed by the early church fathers, and somewhere in the 2nd century, it became doctrine. This is not something that I am making up for the podcast here. This is historical fact. I invite you to check it out. I would propose that the question that Christians should ask themselves today is, knowing the history of the development of this doctrine, what should we then believe as we navigate our life experience today? Is Greek philosophy more elegant, efficient, or logical than the belief system of the Jews, the belief system of Jesus and his followers, the belief system of Paul? And if so, shouldn't we just go with that? When grandma dies, isn't it easier to tell the children that she has gone to heaven to be with Jesus? Weren't the Sadducees right when they insisted that the idea of a resurrection of the body at the end of time was just a little absurd? What happens to the person all those years while they wait? How is a person's body reconstructed in the grave? Even if you could resurrect a body by some miracle, how would you ever get the consciousness or mind or memory of the dead person back into the resurrected body? Is there anything left to work with? What if the body has been cremated and the ashes spread out over the sea? It just doesn't make sense, people say. Whereas the idea of a separate spiritual entity that lives inside of our flesh is intuitive, logical, and much more believable. Today, this worldview of a soul is fortified with many reports of out-of-body experiences and near-death experiences. If people do not have conscious souls that can separate from the body, how could people have all of these kinds of experiences? Another question that people might ask is it really that important what we believe on this question? What difference does it really make whether we believe that the souls go directly to heaven or if they rest in the grave until the end of time in some kind of an unconscious state? Does it really matter what we believe? In the end, don't we all live eternally according to the promise of Jesus? Why get caught up in semantics? Why not just go with a belief system that is easy to teach and promote instead of getting bogged down in the messy concept of a resurrection of the body at the end of time? The idea of a spiritual entity that can hold the consciousness of a person after death may not be very acceptable to the scientific mind, but try getting scientists and skeptics to believe in the idea of the resurrection of a body that has been dead for 3,000 years. That's even harder. Well, I would say that in the end, it probably will not matter which belief system you hold on to. However, may I suggest that following the biblical teaching on this question might be a little safer. Do we really want to start down the road of believing and teaching ideas that are against what the Bible teaches simply because it is more logical or easier to explain? Paul wrote to Timothy this advice: all Scripture is given by inspiration of God and is profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, for instruction in righteousness. If we believe in the Bible, if we believe that it is more profitable for doctrine than the philosophies of Plato, then I believe that it would be important to discover what the Bible really teaches on this subject and go with it, regardless of where that leads us. It may not be an issue of salvation in and of itself. But for some reason, as the children of Israel were coming out of the land of Egypt, a culture that was steeped in the belief of the afterlife, God felt that it was important to set up some guardrails to protect his people from the dangers that come with ancestor worship and a belief in spirits, ghosts, or any kind of meaningful, conscious existence after death. He said to the people through Moses, "When you enter the land the Lord your God is giving you, do not learn to imitate the detestable ways of the nations there. Let no one be found among you who sacrifices their son or daughter in the fire, who practices divination or sorcery, interprets omens, engages in witchcraft, or casts spells, or who is a medium or spiritist, or who consults the dead. Anyone who does these things is detestable to the Lord." Pretty strong words. Why would God put up these kinds of guardrails against spiritualism? There must have been a good reason. You can search the Old Testament, and you will find no teaching about an afterlife in heaven, no teaching of a hell, no teaching of an immortal soul. Why believe in God and follow his law? In the Old Testament, it was all about the blessings that you would receive in this life to the third and fourth generation. Nothing about heaven or hell. The place of the dead in the Old Testament was called Sheol. Old Testament scholars debate about how we should understand Sheol. It is most likely a place that is synonymous with the grave, the pit, and death itself. One time, after King David had a close scrape with death, he thanks God for bringing him back from Sheol. One of the very few references in the Old Testament that speaks of the promise of life after death comes from the book of Job. Let's notice the very precise words that are used. As Job faces his own death, he cries out, "I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in the end he will stand on the earth. And after my skin has been destroyed, yet in my flesh I will see God. I myself will see him with my own eyes, I, and not another. How my heart yearns within me." This is actually an amazing passage that I believe encapsulates the entire Bible teaching on this subject. Death on this earth is inevitable. All must die. We live inside a closed system on this earth with limited resources. Ecosystems with natural life cycles are the only way that life could move forward on this planet. But, Job says, I know. I have a Redeemer. I know that he lives. And even though we must all die, even though worms will destroy this body, yet somehow, in the end, at the last day, when all is said and done, in my flesh I shall see God. Notice that he expects to one day, on the last day, at the end of time, see his Redeemer after death. But it will be in his flesh, not a spirit, not as a ghost, in his flesh. He is convicted that on that day he will see his Redeemer with his own eyes, not the eyes of another. It is not through some type of reincarnation that the dead are raised. Job believes that he himself, with his own body, will look up and welcome his Redeemer on that great day at the end of time. This is an amazing statement. Coming from the mouth of Job, he was ahead of his time in understanding life after death and how it works. I invite you to review that passage. Spend some time with it. Let it seep in. What is the biblical teaching about how the dead will live again? It is only through the resurrection of the body, and only at the end of time. Throughout our series on this subject, we have seen that the consistent teaching of the Bible is that the faithful will live again, but only at the end of time, and only through the resurrection of the body. Not through an energy source that rises up from the body after death. Is it okay to disregard this biblical position and instead follow the teachings of Plato? Well, I guess that partly depends on how much faith you put in the inspiration of the Bible. Perhaps people could say that the Bible teaching on the nature of people and the nature of the afterlife is simply a reflection of the culture and worldview of the people of that time, and that it is not that important to follow the belief system of that day. Kind of like the issue of slavery. The Bible seems to be fine with human slavery. It even has instruction on how an owner should treat his slaves. But we know better now, and we no longer follow the teachings of the Bible on slavery. Well, I leave it to you to determine what works best for you. In an upcoming study here at Worldviews, I'm thinking of presenting some of the reasons why I believe that God set up some of these guardrails. I'm thinking of calling it 10 Reasons Why It's Good to Believe the Dead Are Dead. Watch for that. Even though it is not a matter of salvation, I believe that God had his reasons for protecting his children from spiritualism. Before we close, I want to come back to this statement of Jesus that we read at the beginning of our study, about how people should not worry about those who might kill the body, that we should be more concerned about him who can destroy both the body and the soul in hell. This certainly seems to suggest that Jesus had abandoned the teachings of the Jews on this subject and had adopted the teachings of Plato on the soul and hell. Does it not? How should we understand this statement of Jesus? Well, here are a couple things to consider. First of all, this is an outlier text on this question. When we are building our doctrines, I believe that it is important to consider what the whole Bible says on any given issue. I do not believe that it is ever a wise idea to build up a belief system or a doctrine on one or two texts of the Bible. You can get into so much trouble, and many have. A good principle of Bible study is to do a full survey of the Bible on any given topic. And if you find 50 passages that seem to teach one thing, and then come across 2 or 3 texts that seem to teach the opposite view, what do you think would be the best course of action? I believe it is always a good idea to go with the weight of evidence. Go with the 50 passages and what they teach. At the same time, I believe that it is never wise to ignore the outlier texts. I believe that it is important to dig deep at these texts, take a close look, and try and understand why it is that they seem to teach something different. Because often it is as you drill down deep into these passages that you will find a new and greater understanding of God's power and will for our lives. Sometimes it is the outlier texts themselves that reveal even stronger evidence for what the consensus of Scripture states. As we have shown in our series, most of the Bible teaches the monistic nature of mankind, that people are made up of one whole unit, and that there is no immortal soul living inside us. And yet, there are a few passages, like this one, that with a surface reading seems to teach that people do have souls. There are a couple more from the writings of Paul, who at one point says he would just like to die so that he could go and be with the Lord. Another one where he seems to describe an out-of-body experience, the kind people talk about today. Actually, the out-of-body experience was kind of a trending thing that was happening during those times. It was Plato and his students that loved to get together in parties and meditate and have these out-of-body experiences. So it was a question of the day. I think the people from Greece, the churches that Paul had established, who were steeped in Greek philosophy, would ask him these questions. When you have one of your visions, do you think that it's an out-of-body experience? Well, we'll have to take a look at what Paul says about his out-of-body experience in another podcast. Stay tuned. For today, let's drill down on this statement of Jesus, shall we? Do not be afraid of those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather, be afraid of the one who can destroy both soul and body in hell. First of all, we should note that even though the King James Version translators went with hell here for this verse, that it's important to understand that this is not the same hell of Greek philosophy. Most other versions of the Bible actually follow suit with the King James here and translate this as hell in English. But there are a few translations who are more true to the original text, which says, "Be afraid of the one who can destroy both soul and body in Gehenna." Check any concordance or lexicon, and you will see that the word here in this passage that is so often translated as hell is actually Gehenna. And it's important to understand that this is the only place in the entire Bible that this word Gehenna shows up. The more common words for hell in Greek philosophy and in the rest of the New Testament is Hades or Tartarus. And yet the word here is Gehenna. What is Gehenna? Well, it turns out that Gehenna was an actual physical place just outside the city of Jerusalem. It was a place where people dumped their garbage and the bodies of criminals who had been executed. There were often fires there to burn the refuse. And when you think about that, when you put that into perspective of what Jesus was saying, it puts a whole new understanding on the message that Jesus was giving here. We could ask, if Jesus was showing a leaning toward the teachings of Plato, why didn't he just use Hades here instead of the city dump, Gehenna? I feel sure that we're going to have a series of Bible studies on what the Bible says about hell. But for today, let's notice one important point. When Jesus talks about the destruction of people who have lived a life of evil and exploitation of others, notice that the action here is final, complete, done and done. The idea that there is a place called hell where bad people go to be tortured in hot flames for eternity is perhaps one of the most evil ideas that Lucifer has ever concocted, in my humble opinion. The God that I serve and worship does not punish people for eternity because of some unfortunate decisions that they made in their short life here on this earth. The God that I have come to know in Scripture and in my life experience is a God of intense love and compassion for his creatures. He loves everyone who has ever lived on this planet so much that he died for them. What greater love is there? To suggest that this God of infinite love would somehow permit, allow, or even delight in the eternal torture of people because they didn't accept him makes God out to be a raging tyrant. Exactly what the devil would like people to believe about God. This may have been a powerful way to control the behavior of the masses over the centuries, but it is not biblical. Right here in this passage that we are looking at today, Jesus says that we should be more concerned about him who can destroy, not torture, destroy both the body and the soul. This passage should also inform our belief system as to the nature of mankind. If God can destroy the body and the soul, it certainly goes against the Greek idea of the immortality of the soul. There is so much more that we could say about hell, but we'll leave that to another time. We need to wrap up. Let's go back to the phrase of body and soul. If Jesus did not believe that people have souls, why would he build his argument this way? Surely he must have believed in the soul. Well, as we have already pointed out, the word soul has so many shades of meaning. The word used here in Matthew, in the original Greek, is psyche, or psyche, as some pronounce it. Does the word have a familiar sound to it? It should. We get a lot of English words from this, like psychology, the study of the mind. In fact, the Greek word psyche is used a lot in the New Testament and is most often translated as mind or life, especially in the more modern translations. In fact, right in the passage that we're studying, notice down in verse 39 of the same statement of Jesus to his disciples as he's sending them off to preach the good news. He says, "He that findeth his life shall lose it, and he that loseth his life for my sake shall find it." Here, the same Greek word, translated as soul in verse 28, is now translated life, even by the King James translators. Same Greek word, psyche, is now translated life. Let's go back to verse 28 and use that translation. See how it works. "Fear not them which kill the body, but are not able to kill the life, but rather fear him which is able to destroy both life and body in hell." Well, I get why translators went with soul. It just doesn't have the same ring to it, does it? When the body is killed, we see that in and of itself, life being destroyed. So it just doesn't have the same punch, to use life again as the translation here for psyche. But we could use things like the mind, the inner person, the personal identity, the real person. Put any one of those concepts in place of soul here in this passage, and I think it makes more sense. If we step back and take a look at the big teaching that Jesus is trying to get across here, we see that Jesus is saying, don't worry about people who can kill your body of flesh. Be more aware and concerned about the one who has control over your eternal destiny. Become friends with him, followers of him. Losing your earthly body is not the end. People who might kill your earthly flesh, it's of little consequence. It really means nothing. That is kind of like life with a small l. Be more concerned about him who will have the final say about your eternal life. Life with a capital L. Sometimes when people are building their doctrines, there can be a tendency to take things out of context. This is what is called irresponsible biblical hermeneutics. We have a couple of presentations on that here at Worldviews. Take a look and find those. Taking things out of context and trying to use a brief section of a biblical passage to prove something that has nothing to do with the original presentation. Was Jesus doing a discourse here on the nature of mankind? Was he deliberating with the disciples over the value of the philosophies of Plato, over the temple teachings of the Jews? No. And therefore, it is irresponsible, inappropriate, to turn this into a teaching of Jesus on the nature of people and the Greek concepts of a soul and hell. The message of Jesus here in this passage is most likely best understood as an encouragement not to worry about persecution. We need not fear people or governments. Even if the worst happens and they kill our bodies, that has no impact on our eternal destiny. Only God, the one who stands as the only real judge of our life, has anything to do with our eternal destiny. Ultimately, he is the one we need to fear, respect, and honor, and follow. He is the one that is in charge of what happens to our real person in the afterlife to come. Well, that's it for our study today. I hope that I was able to stimulate in your mind some thought about the nature of people. May God be with you as you continue your study of His Word and find meaning and hope in the promised eternal life to come.